If you're listening to this, odds are you've already met that person. The neighbor who treats rules like polite suggestions when they're inconvenient. The one who sees shared space as optional and private property as an obstacle in their way. Everyone has at least one story like that. But I'd wager my late grandfather's rusted-out tractor that you don't have this one. Because my issue wasn't just a mildly irritating neighbor. It wasn't even a run-of-the-mill, power-drunk homeowners association. It was a woman who decided, without asking, without permission, and without a shred of embarrassment, that my land, my family's land, now belonged to her as a personal shortcut to shave exactly 3 minutes off her morning drive. And those 3 minutes were about to cost her tens of thousands of dollars, her ego, and a brutally expensive lesson in physics, soil mechanics, and rural property law. Let's call her Marjorie Kellerman. Marjorie lived in a shiny new development that appeared almost overnight on the western edge of my ranch. One of those glossy, copy-paste executive neighborhoods where the houses are enormous, the yards are laughably small, and the HOA bylaws are thicker than the Bible, but somehow only enforced on people who aren't on the board. My place, Red Willow Ranch, couldn't be more different. 300-plus acres of rolling pasture. Old oak groves that were standing long before electricity showed up. Cattle that recognize my voice better than most humans do. Land that's been worked, sweated over, bled on, and passed down through 4 generations. This isn't an investment to me. It's not a spreadsheet entry or a future flip. It's where my days start before sunrise and end after cicadas take over. It's quiet, it's earned, and it's sacred. Or at least it was until Marjorie discovered my dirt access track. Now I need to explain that track, because that's where the illusion began. It wasn't a road. It wasn't paved. There were no signs, no curbs, no lanes. Just 2 parallel ruts worn into the dirt by tractors hauling hay, checking fence lines, and moving equipment from the north pasture down to barn. It crossed my land and eventually emptied onto a county road on the far side. If you didn't own the land, didn't care about your suspension, and didn't respect boundaries, sure, it could shave a few minutes off a trip into town. And that's where Marjorie came in. The first time I saw her, I was fixing a stretch of barbed wire about a quarter mile inside my property line when I heard a low, aggressive engine hum behind me. Not a tractor, not a farm truck, something expensive. I turned around, and there it was, a pearl-white luxury SUV easing off the pristine HOA cul-de-sac and rolling straight onto my dirt track like it belonged there. She pulled up beside me, the window gliding down with a soft electric whir. Oversized sunglasses. Perfect manicure gripping the wheel. Jaw already set, like she'd rehearsed being irritated in the mirror. "Excuse me," she said. Not a question, not friendly, just a demand. "Does this road go through?" I wiped the sweat off my forehead with my glove and answered as evenly as I could. "No, ma'am. This is private property. You'll want to turn around and take the main road about 2 miles east." She gave a short huff, the kind that says you've personally offended her by existing. "Well, my GPS says it connects." "Your GPS is wrong," I replied, still calm. "And you're trespassing." That's when I knew exactly who I was dealing with. She didn't argue. She didn't ask anything else. She didn't apologize. She rolled the window back up, stared straight ahead, and hit the gas, bouncing past me in a cloud of dust like my words were just background noise from someone beneath her notice. I stood there with fence pliers in my hand, watching her taillights disappear over the rise, thinking it was rude, but surely a one-time mistake. It wasn't. That drive was a test run. Within a week, I saw the same SUV cutting across my land almost every day, morning like clockwork, sometimes in the afternoon, once even near dusk. She wasn't lost anymore. She'd adopted the route. My ranch had become her toll-free express lane. So I tried the neighborly approach first, because that's what reasonable people do. I installed a large metal sign right where she jumped the curb from the HOA development. Reflective red letters, bolted deep, "Private property," and "No trespassing." Under it, a smaller sign, polite but firm, "Active agriculture, heavy equipment." I figured that would settle it. Sign up, problem solved. That sign lasted exactly 2 days. On the 3rd afternoon, it was gone. Not knocked over, not damaged, just gone. I found it half a mile away in a drainage ditch, bent, scraped, and stamped clean through the center with a tire track, like a personal signature. The tread matched her SUV perfectly. That's when irritation hardened into something colder. I decided to confront her directly. One morning, I parked my old farm truck near the entrance and waited. Right on schedule, 8:12 a.m. There she came, rolling off the curb like she owned the place. I stepped out and stood square in the middle of the track. She stopped, mostly because she didn't have another option. I walked up and said, "Ma'am, we need to talk. You can't keep driving through here. This is private land. It's dangerous. You're damaging my soil, and you're putting my livestock at risk." She cracked the window maybe 2 inches. "I've been using this road for weeks," she snapped. "It's clearly an established right-of-way." My jaw tightened. "It's a farm track," I said. "My family's used it for 70 years. Your few weeks of trespassing don't create legal rights." She adjusted her sunglasses and said the sentence that changed everything. "Well, the HOA president said it looked like an old access road we could probably use. It's much more convenient for several of us." That's when I realized this wasn't just entitlement. It was organized. I told her flat out, "The HOA doesn't own this land, and they don't get to grant access. The next time I see you here, I'm calling the sheriff." She smirked. "This is a community issue," she said. "You're being very unreasonable, hoarding all this land." Then she swerved around my truck, tore straight through a patch of young winter grass, and sped off. Hoarding land. That night, I called the HOA president. His response was dismissive, casual, like I was bothering him with something minor. "If the road is already there," he said, "what's the harm in a few cars using it?" That was the moment I understood something important about them. I wasn't a landowner defending a livelihood in their eyes. I was an inconvenience. And in their world, inconveniences get moved out of the way. Now pause the story for a moment, because what's happening here isn't just one rude woman cutting across a pasture. This is a classic HOA power dynamic. And once you understand it, Marjorie's behavior stops looking impulsive and starts looking almost scripted. In most homeowners associations, standard procedure is very clear. An HOA only has authority over common areas it owns or maintains: roads, sidewalks, shared green spaces, things like that. What it absolutely does not have the authority to do is grant access across land it doesn't own, especially privately deeded agricultural property. That's not community management. That's trespassing wrapped in polite language and a blazer. From a legal standpoint, Marjorie's favorite phrase, "established right away," meant nothing here. An easement doesn't magically appear because someone drives somewhere a handful of times. It requires written agreements, recorded deeds, or decades of open, uninterrupted, uncontested use. A few weeks of shortcutting doesn't create rights. It creates liability. Psychologically, though, this is where it gets interesting. What Marjorie was stuck in is something called moral licensing. She wasn't thinking, "I'm trespassing." She was thinking, "The HOA said it's probably fine." And that small mental permission let her ignore direct warnings, posted signs, and even the threat of law enforcement. Once authority, real or imagined, backs entitlement, people stop negotiating and start conquering. That's why polite conversations stop working. In her mind, the rules had already been rewritten. When polite talks fail, when signs get ripped out of ground, when the law shrugs and mutters civil matter, something inside you shifts. Not anger exactly. Not yet. It's closer to clarity. One evening, I stood watching fresh tire ruts scar my pasture. Mud churned where grass had been growing just days earlier, and a simple, unsettling truth settled in. Marjorie wasn't going to stop because she genuinely believed she didn't have to. In her head, the HOA had crowned her in the right, and anyone who opposed her was just noise, and noise could be ignored. So I stopped trying to convince her. I started preparing. My first stop was Earl Patterson, an old friend of my dad's and a retired land surveyor. The kind of man who knows property law the way other folks know football stats. Over bad coffee in his shop, I laid everything out. Every incursion, every conversation, every threat. Earl didn't interrupt. He just nodded slowly, then finally said, "Son, your boundaries are clean. No easement, no access. No gray area. She's bluffing because no one's called it yet. He rolled out a plat map and tapped the boundary line with a callous finger. First thing, he said, we make damn sure nobody can pretend they didn't know where your land starts. That weekend, we walked the entire boundary. Steel posts driven deep into the ground. Bright orange caps. Reflective markers. Signs bolted on with lock nuts. The kind you don't remove unless you show up with tools and bad intentions. While we were working, Marjorie drove by again. Slower this time. Watching. Taking inventory. Earl squinted at her SUV and smiled. That thing's got low clearance, doesn't it? Yeah, I said. Built for asphalt. He chuckled. Be a shame if this track needed maintenance. But I didn't move just yet. I needed certainty. So I drove into town and sat down with Rachel Monroe, a property rights attorney who'd built her career defending farmers against developers with deeper pockets and thinner patience. I asked her exactly what I needed to know. What can I legally do to my own land that discourages trespass without inviting a lawsuit? She laughed, then got serious. From a legal standpoint, she explained, a landowner has broad authority to modify terrain for legitimate agricultural purposes. Tilling, grading, erosion control, drainage management, even placing rocks or barriers. As long as you're not creating a concealed man trap. No spikes, no hidden pits, no intentional deception. Then she raised a finger. But you must warn. Clear signage. Multiple points. No ambiguity. If someone ignores warnings and damages their vehicle, responsibility shifts to them. And document everything. I walked out her office with a plan and a quiet sense of inevitability. If Marjorie wanted to treat my ranch like a road, I was going to remind her exactly what working land feels like. I started with the signs. Big ones. Not just no trespassing, but specific warnings. Hazardous terrain ahead. Agricultural operations in progress. Not a through road. Risk of vehicle damage. One at the entrance. 120 feet in. Another just to be safe. You'd have to be blind or stubborn to miss them. Then came the land itself. I hitched up my heaviest disc harrow. Not a garden toy. A serious piece of equipment meant to break hard clay. I dropped the discs deep, real deep, and drove perpendicular to the direction of travel, chewing the soil into aggressive corrugations. Soft ridges. Loose earth that shifted under weight. For my tractor, it was nothing. For a luxury SUV, it was going to feel like riding a jackhammer made of mud. Next came the rocks. I hauled jagged stones from the creek bed, melon-sized, heavy, half buried along the center hump and edges. Visible, obvious, impossible to ignore unless you truly believed you shouldn't have to. Then there was a low spot, a natural depression that already collected water. I deepened it slightly, diverted overflow from a cattle trough, just enough to turn it into a mud bog, innocent looking on top, but underneath, thick, suctioning clay. And finally, the piece de resistance, manure. Every ranch has it. Compost, old hay, waste, rich, dark, and pungent. I spread a thick layer across a stretch just past a mud bog. Not hidden, not camouflage, just there, unapologetic. I photographed everything. Timestamps, angles, signage, terrain conditions. When I finished, the track looked exactly like what it truly was, a working farm lane under active maintenance. Then I waited. 2 days passed. Nothing. For a brief moment, I wondered if she'd finally gotten the message. Thursday morning erased that hope. At 8:28 a.m., I heard it. The engine revving harder than necessary. That familiar sound of confidence mixed with impatience. I grabbed my coffee, picked up my binoculars, and stepped onto the porch. There she was. Marjorie slowed at the entrance. She saw the signs. She saw the torn-up ground. She hesitated. Then she floored it. She hit the furrows too fast. The SUV bucked violently, suspension screaming, her head snapping side to side inside the cabin. I could almost feel the moment her anger shifted into forced concentration as she tried to power through. She reached the rock section and swerved. Too late. Metal met stone with sharp, unmistakable scrape that carried across the pasture. She didn't stop. Then came the mud. She probably thought it was just a shallow puddle. She gunned the engine. The front wheels dropped like they'd driven off the edge of the world. The rear tires spun wildly, flinging mud in every direction, coating that pearl-white paint in thick brown sludge. The vehicle sank axle deep, then deeper, then silence. The driver's door flew open. She stepped straight into the mud, looked down, and screamed, a raw, furious sound I heard from hundreds of yards away. She tried rocking the car. Nothing. She was stuck, trapped, and the only way out was on foot. I waited a minute. Then I drove down the field line and stopped a safe distance away. Having some trouble? I called out. She turned on me like a cornered animal. You did this, she shrieked. You sabotaged this road. Road, I said, putting on my best confused expression. Ma'am, this is my pasture. I've been doing agricultural maintenance. Didn't you see the signs? This is a trap, she yelled. The rocks are erosion control, I said calmly. The tilling is for soil health. The mud's drainage. If you stayed on the paved road like I asked weeks ago, you wouldn't be sinking into a cow field. I'm calling the sheriff. Please do, I said. You might also want a tow truck. Bring a long winch. When the deputy arrived, the same one from before, he took one look at the signs, the terrain, the half-buried SUV, and sighed. Ma'am, he said, you're trespassing on clearly marked private land. The owner has the right to manage the soil. You ignored multiple warnings. The tow truck driver charged her a hazardous recovery fee. It took over an hour to get the SUV out. The exhaust tore loose on the rocks. I didn't smile. I didn't need to. The thing about moments like that is people think the story ends when the tow truck leaves, when the dust settles, when the problem rolls away on a flatbed. It doesn't. The real ending happens quietly afterward, in paperwork, in silence, in the subtle shift of power when someone realizes they were never as untouchable as they believed. A week later, I received a letter from the HOA's attorney. Formal letterhead. Very serious tone. They demanded compensation for vehicle damage, emotional distress, and unreasonable land alteration. I handed it straight to Rachel. She responded with a packet. Photos of every sign, time-stamped images of the terrain, trail camera video showing Marjorie driving past multiple warnings without stopping, and a counterclaim for soil damage, crop loss, and remediation costs. That response changed the temperature fast. Suddenly, the HOA president who had brushed me off before understood this wasn't a neighborly disagreement. It was a liability nightmare. He showed up in person, walked the boundary, saw the signs, saw the land. 2 days later, a memo went out to every resident. The western tract is private property. Do not use it. The HOA assumes no liability for damages incurred by trespassing. Marjorie tried small claims court anyway. The judge reviewed the evidence for less than 10 minutes. Then he looked at her and said, Ma'am, if you drive into a clearly marked hazardous area, you don't get to sue the ground for being there. Case dismissed with prejudice. She still lives next door. She drives a long way now. And the track, it's gone. Grass reclaimed it. Blackberry bushes grew thick and thorny along the edges. The land healed, the way it always does when you give it space. Now here's the part people usually miss. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about winning. It was about boundaries. Legally, this only worked because everything was documented, clearly warned and justified. That's the part nobody wants to hear. There's no shortcut around doing things the right way if you want protection when things go wrong. Psychologically, this whole saga is a lesson in how entitlement grows. It feeds on silence. It feeds on hesitation. It feeds on people being too polite to enforce lines that were never meant to be crossed. A lot of people fall into the trap of believing that if they explain themselves clearly enough, the other person will eventually respect them. But when someone believes convenience outranks consent, explanation sounds like weakness. The lesson is simple, but not easy. Respect doesn't always come from asking nicely. Sometimes it comes from designing systems, legal, physical, social, that make disrespect inconvenient. That doesn't mean cruelty. It doesn't mean escalation for sport. It means knowing your rights, understanding human behavior, and refusing to let someone else's urgency become your emergency. So I'm curious, what would you have done? Let it slide to keep the peace? Go straight to court? Or do exactly what I did? use the system, the land, and the rules as they were written? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read them. And if you've got your own story of entitlement meeting reality, trust me, you're not alone. Just remember, keep your gates locked, know where your lines are, and never underestimate the power of a well-placed mud hole.